In this video, we're going to learn about some operations we can do for strings and string expressions. We're going to talk about the operators that work with strings first. And here's the two basic ones that you need to be worried about for now. The plus sign, that's the addition operator for working with numbers. But if we're working with strings, this is the concatenation operator. Concatenation. It concatenates two values. And all that big fancy word means, concatenation, is that it takes two strings and it puts them together. So if I have a string that says cat and a string that says dog, and I concatenate them, I get cat dog. And then the plus equals is the concatenation operator that takes a string, concatenates something onto it, stores it back into another string of the same name. So very much similar to what the plus equal sign does with numbers, but this does it with strings. Adds whatever's on the right side of this operator to the end of the current string. So let's take a look at some examples. First, we have some constants that we're going to use in a bunch of these examples. We have a constant to hold the first name, and that is assigned the value Grace. So the first name is equal to the string Grace. Last name is equal to the string Hopper. So we declared two constants, first name Grace, last name Hopper. So if we take last name, and since we're using a string, this is an addition. This is the concatenation operator. So we're taking the last name, which is Hopper. We're concatenating on a comma because it's in quotes. It's an actual literal value, a comma and a space. And then we're concatenating on the first name. So Hopper, comma, space, Grace. And we end up with name being equal to the value Hopper, comma, space, Grace. Okay. It's important to realize that the space is in there. If we didn't put the space and the comma in there, it would be Hopper, Grace, all slammed together with no spaces in it. So we had to concatenate the comma and the space in there to put some separation. Let's look at another example. Name equals the last name. So we're using the same first name and last name. We're doing another example, and we're using let. So we're declaring a variable called name. It has to be a variable this time, not a constant, because we're going to change its assignment. So we're starting out with the last name. So Hopper, name is going to be currently equal to Hopper. After this line of code executes, Hopper will be assigned to name. And then we're going to say name, and we're going to do plus equals. And it's going to concatenate, comma, space onto the current last name, which was Hopper. So now Hopper becomes Hopper with a comma and a space after it. Okay. And then we'll use the plus equals concatenation operator again to concatenate on the first name. So it takes the current value, Hopper, comma, space, adds on the first name, which was Grace, and we end up with Hopper, comma, space, Grace. All right, and the last thing we're going to look at, well, on this slide, is how to concatenate string variables with a template literal. So I want to point out something very important. This is a tick mark, a back tick, as opposed to an apostrophe character. So we talked about strings. We can use single quotes or double quotes. Okay, this is not a single quote. This is a backtick character. It is on your keyboard to the left of your one key. There's a backtick character, and also the tilde character is usually on that key. So this is a backtick, and a backtick is called a template literal. And basically, it's kind of like a string, but we can use variable names inside of it so that we don't have to do all the concatenation. We write out the whole string, and we use a placeholder with variable names in it It makes it a little bit shorter to write some things sometimes. So in this case, we use the backtick, and then you use a $ and braces to enclose the name of a variable. And the variable is still Hopper, or last name is still set to Hopper. So it substitutes in the value of last name here, Hopper. Then it uses the literal comma and a space. And then this says substitute the first name in here, and we still get Hopper, comma, Grace. So all three of these take the first name and last name and concatenate them in some form with the comma and the space to turn the individual first name and the individual last name into a string with last name, comma, space, first name. They all have the same result. 3 different ways to do the same thing by combining strings and doing some concatenation. All right, sometimes when we're concatenating, things can get quite long. So let's look at an example that takes multiple lines to accomplish what we want it to do. All right, we have a constant called greeting that's set to the value hello. We have a constant called price that's set to the value 15.99. And we have a constant called isValid that's set to the value true. This is the Boolean data type, which we haven't really worked with. We talked about it a little bit. A lot of times when we work with Booleans, the variable names or the constant names start out with the word is. Is this valid? Yes or true, it is. Or false, it is not. So you see is for the first part of a variable name quite often with Boolean data types. So let's look at what we're doing here. We're concatenating a lot of things together. And if we put all of this on one line, it would go clear over off the edge of our screen and it would be hard to read. So we want to break up this concatenation onto multiple lines. And this is showing a good way to do it. So it's taking the greeting, hello, and it's concatenating onto it the string. We know it's a string because it's in quotes. An exclamation point, space, and then is the price really, and another space. Then it's concatenating, and this is a good spot right after your concatenation symbol. That is a good place to break to the next line. Okay, you can't really do it before the concatenation symbol. You should do it after the plus sign. But you can break to the next line, and JavaScript will read it just fine. So we go down the next line. Is the price really? Concatenate on the word just. Then we're going to concatenate on the actual price, which was set to $15.99. And then we're concatenating on a question mark, and then the word answer, colon, plus is valid, which is the value true. And then we're concatenating on a period. And this whole thing gets evaluated, and it ends up being, the message ends up being this: hello, is the price really just $15.99? Answer, colon, true. I do want to point out the answer here would technically be on the same line as this when it prints out. Good word wrap, depending on what you're putting it out to. But there's nothing here to force this to go to the next line. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. Here is the same thing. Instead of using the plus concatenation operator, we're using a template literal. And we have the tick mark here. And then we're substituting in the variables. Greeting, the constants in this case. Greeting is hello. So we're not having to open and close these quotes like we did up here all the time. So we substitute in greeting, exclamation point, is the price really just, and then substitutes in the value for price, $15.99, answer, colon, substitute the value for is valid as true. A little shorter, a little easier to read, in my opinion. And then we still get the same result. Hello, is the price really just $15.99? Answer, true. So we'll work with concatenation in some of the examples we have coming up. We can also use some escape sequences. If we put these in our strings, they do some different things. So imagine this. I'm trying to do this concatenation with a bunch of things, and I start my string out with a quotation mark, but I actually want a quotation mark to appear in the sentence. So if I use another double quotation, the compiler is going to think it's the end of my string, and that can get confusing. So what we do is we use some escape characters. If I use a backslash in front of it, it says this isn't the end of the string. I actually want to see a real quotation, double quotation mark. Or I actually want to see a real single quotation mark. The same thing goes if I use a backslash. If I want to see a backslash, since backslashes indicate that these are escape characters, I have to use two backslashes to say, no, I really want to see a backslash. That can get a little confusing. We'll see that in some examples. And then there's one other operator that I briefly talked about in the last slide, and that's \n. I shouldn't say there's one operator. There are more. These are 4 examples. \n, anytime we use that in a string, it automatically puts whatever follows it on the next line below the current line. So back here I said, hello, is the price just $15.99? I said answer true would not be on the next line. If I really wanted it to be on the next line, I'd have to put a \n right in this place right here, so that it would force answer true to be on the second line. Otherwise, this would actually all end up on the same line. So we'll see examples of that too coming up when we do some actual examples in Visual Studio Code. So here's an example. I have double quotes. Just to avoid confusion, I have a single quote that appears in my string, so I put a \n in front of it. Okay. And here's another one. I wanted to see a \n in the thing that gets printed out. But if I use a \, it thinks I'm trying to do escape something. So I have to use a double \, in my code. So it says alert, the file is in the JavaScript \strings directory. I put 2 of them in the code, but when it prints out, there's only 1 there. Some other codes we can use. We can use a \, there's our escape character again, and we can use some of these codes to print out some special characters. Like U00A9 is the code for a copyright character. Or U00AE is the code for a registered trademark. And then some of our emoticons are in here. Here's a smiley face, U263A. Here's a heart, U2665. So if we insert those in strings anywhere, it will substitute the proper symbols into our statement. So here's an example. I, and then \U2665 is the heart symbol. Murat, I think it's called Murat. I think that's how you say the name. That's the name of our book. \U00AE, which is the registered trademark symbol, publishing. Followed by U263A, which is a smiley face. A \n says go to a new line. And then in here, we're printing U00A9, which is the copyright symbol, and then the year 2020. So there's an example of using some of those Unicode characters. If you click on this link, it will take you to a website. It shows you all the different Unicode characters, or you can just go to Google and type Unicode characters, and there's all kinds of charts that will show you what they all are, all over the internet. All right, so we talked about concatenating or joining strings together. We talked about the different concatenation operators. I explained template literals and how we can substitute variables into our strings with a template literal. We looked at some string expressions to join a bunch of strings together. We talked about the escape and Unicode characters that we can use, special characters, and how to get them into our. In the next video, we're going to talk about objects, their methods and properties, and how to use some basic objects. And then we'll get into some videos actually looking at some code in our editor, and we'll write a couple programs or evaluate a couple programs in the editor and see how they work.